Welcome to the Mama's Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she is. Hi, if you, this is the Mama's Well podcast, and if you're new to the Mama's Well podcast, this is a place where mamas and daddies are learning about ourselves through our children. And we are just in the trenches with kiddos who have come from chaotic backgrounds and have suffered tremendous trauma. And thankfully, they are pointing us back to some things that we have within ourselves to heal. And when we learn to take care of those places in ourselves, those fears, those anxieties, that overwhelm, then we're better equipped to help them. And so it's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that I've discovered, and it's growing me up so that I can help them grow up. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then you're in the right place. And so welcome. And today I have a friend with me that I'm excited to introduce you to. And as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, even just a few minutes ago, I was reminded of how I really met this person. And I met this person indirectly. Oh wow, this is an interesting story. But I went to junior high school with her sister-in-law. We were just little ones in school at a very small school, and her sister-in-law's name is Jenny. And Jenny came into class one day and she said, "My daddy is going to start a church in the inner city. And I don't know what that's going to mean, but it's weird." And basically that's what she said. She thought it was weird, and I thought it was weird. We're like, what is he doing? And he had a heart for people that were living on the streets. He had a heart for people that were living in the margins, as my friend's going to talk about today. And he began to meet needs. He began to equip churches to help him, or teach churches how to help him by providing food. And so our church actually got involved, and we began cooking these meals, once a month. And then we would go down in the city of Houston, where I grew up, and we would serve dinner, lunch. And we would talk to people, and we would hear people's stories, and we would love on people. And I was just a little kid, but I saw what was happening, and it touched me, and I never forgot about it. And then fast forward years later, my husband meets my friend Jenny's brother, who was younger than us at the time, and I didn't know him really well, but that is my guest husband. Did you get all that? That was a crazy story, but I'll just cut it right there. I met you, Natul. Hello, yes. Natul Middlebrook.
Hi,
welcome.
Tara. I am so glad to be here. But yeah, we go way back.
We go way back before we even knew each other.
Yeah, for sure.
And the cool thing that hit me right when I sat down in this chair a few minutes ago is that we met indirectly based on something that is really, really a big part of your life.
Yes, it was a pivotal moment in my life, actually, my experience at that church. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So let's start. We'll back the train up a little bit and just give us an introduction. You're a foster mom, adoptive mom, biological mom. You're a wife, married to a doctor who's a really cool guy. So tell us all about it. Dr. Dan. Yeah.
You sent me that book the other day. Yes. So I am Natul Middlebrook. I like to tell people that it's like mysterious tamale pie meets apple pie, my name, and it kind of defines just the way our family life. I'm Venezuelan by birth, and I married a small town country doctor, and we're raising 5 biracial children, one of whom is adopted. And in a nutshell, I now run a nonprofit called the Hug Collective. It's based out of Montgomery here, but we serve young men who age out of orphan care in Haiti.
Okay.
So that is really the nuts and bolts of my work right now.
Yeah. Natul, when I look at you and I look at your family, you are a strong woman. Like you are, you really are. And you're navigating a business, a nonprofit. You're running a household. You're a chef. You cook beautiful meals, and you serve lots of people at your home. I've been part of that before. You do a lot. You are a really, really high functioning individual.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
I think I am. I am not as much as I used to. I think I reached my capacity.
Yeah.
I used to think that I could do it all, but realized that maybe it wasn't the healthiest thing for myself and for my family. And so, learning how to put in nice boundaries over our life. But yeah, we talk about the Enneagram a little bit, but I'm an Enneagram 8, and Enneagram 8s tend to be high functioning. They do a lot. So really for me, it's how do I do less and still keep healthy and feel productive. And so, we're, I don't like the word busy because I think it's an overused word, but we definitely have full lives.
Yeah. Yeah. You do a lot. And I've always it's inspiring. But I also the more I've gotten to know you, I've seen that that you are recognizing, wow, I have a lot going on. And so where do you think, let's go back to you said you're from, I like how you say it. I say Venezuela, but how do you say it?
You can say Venezuela. Venezuela.
No, that's so good. Okay, so tell me, let's talk about that, because honestly, what I am starting to, I'm digging down in the layers of you. I'm getting to know you more and more deeply, and I love it. But I want to go there today.
Yeah,
I want to go back. There. I wanted you to tell me your story because you never have.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I'm glad that you're asking because truthfully, I'm 43 years old and this is a story that I really didn't feel comfortable sharing until 20 years after. So there's a lot of shame with it, but I feel like finally I am strong enough and in a secure enough place where I can share it with people because it's very closely tied to the work that I do today. But before I start that, I have a little bit of an illustration here. I just have some regular writing paper. My husband and I had an orphan care ministry at our church for a while, and I kept mentioning the marginalized, and I had a friend go, I don't really know what that means. And I had never had anyone ask me that, and I had never really thought about what that meant. Yeah. But I just thought of writing paper. Yeah. And I thought, if you see the red lines right here, these are the margins. And then within the margins, there's a big space. And a lot of us mainstream privileged people are in this space where they're free to make choices and free to make mistakes, and there's room to grow and room to breathe. And it feels good to be in this space. But the people that are living in the margins, if you notice, don't have that space. It's very narrow. It could feel suffocating.
There's pitfalls, there's holes.
Yes. Yeah. Embrace the analogy, girlfriend. But yes, there's holes. If you want to even go further, when teachers write and make corrections, usually that red ink is all over the margins. But most importantly, you have an awareness that you're not here. Yeah. And the feelings that creates is inferiority, hopelessness, just feelings that you're never, ever going to get here.
Because that red line is so big and maybe even so tall and so powerful, you could never cross it.
You can never cross it. Exactly. And so that is what I want to talk about, just that feeling of being marginalized. I was born in Venezuela. I was 3 months old. So I was born in October. I came to the United States February of 1978. And those 3 months turned out to be a defining thing in my life that impacted me at first very, very negatively, but ultimately God used it for his glory. And so I was 14 years old in middle school. I was a straight A student. My parents were very, very poor. My dad is a product of growing up in an abusive home, and he perpetuated that abuse. So we were emotionally, physically, mentally abused in our home. And really my escape was school. I was a really good student. And when I was 14 years old, a prep school from New England came down to our school. They were really trying to get more Latinx students in their school system, and I had qualified to be one of those students. Wow. And so I was filling out the application, and it asked for a social security number. And I realized I had grown up knowing that we weren't citizens. I had grown up knowing that, you know, we weren't even residents. But I always thought, oh, there's a fix for this. Mm-hmm. But when I asked my mom, she was like, well, we don't have that. And I started asking questions, and I realized that we were just illegal. We had no status in this country. And because I didn't have that social security number, it was going to prevent me from going to this school. And that was the very first time that I felt the sting of being marginalized, knowing that there was no way out of this home that I was in. I had an amazing mom, but she was a victim of an abusive husband. And so there was a lot of hurt in that. I went on to a magnet high school here in Houston, and I knew that I was illegal, and I was so ashamed of it. And I found myself just keeping it a secret. But I knew that I wasn't able to get a license. I wasn't able to go out of the country at all. I wasn't able to go to college. And that for me was the most hurtful thing. So my senior year comes along. I didn't want to try to go to a lawyer because I was told that it could get my parents in trouble and that we'd all be deported. And so I had this plan that when I turned 18, I was going to go to a lawyer, and the lawyer was going to be able to fix it so that I could go to college. But before that, I think this is an important part of my story, is I had finally worked up the courage to share with a faculty member in my school, not only that I was being physically and mentally abused by my father, but that I was illegal. It was a big deal, and I don't know why at that moment I felt like I needed to share it. And the teacher with whom I shared that listened to me, and she sympathized, but nothing ever came of it. And that was just my first experience of like putting myself out there and not seeing anything good come of that. 18 years old, all my friends go off to school. I'm totally left alone. My dad at that point had had enough of the United States, moves to Mexico with my mom, and I'm left to fend for myself. Wow. I was homeless. I went to live one aunt's house to another aunt's house. I couldn't get a job. I was completely alone and really felt like there was no, it was one of those situations where I was like, man, there's no solution here. Like, what am I to do? So I finally went to a lawyer, and it was 1997, and it was a year after immigration had passed some very stringent laws. And really there was no way that I could become legal unless I got married. I was 18 years old. And people actually encouraged me, hey, you know, I had friends, hey, I'll marry you, or whatever.
I bet they did.
But I just didn't feel like it was right.
Yeah.
I just didn't feel that it was right. And I tried to do things legally, but really all the doors had closed. The lawyer said, you can declare yourself illegal and go in front of a judge to be deported, and you have a 50-50 chance of having a suspension of deportation. And he goes, but we have to prove your case. And in order to prove your case, you have to say you don't speak the language, that if you were to go and be deported to Venezuela, it would be severe hardship. He was basically asking me to deny my culture. I did speak the language. I was raised by Venezuelans. I grew up listening to Venezuelan music, eating Venezuelan food. So here I was feeling very much Venezuelan, feeling very much an American, but feeling very lost. And I didn't feel like I belonged in either place.
Yeah.
And I decided against it. I was too scared. I didn't know what that would look like. And so for a couple years, that's another story for another day, I just really kind of just made it through and was in survival mode. And one day someone told me about this inner city church that was super exciting, that was located in Houston. And I really just wanted something different. And
okay, so, what year was that?
I think that year was 99. or maybe it was 98. I got
Okay.
married in 99. So
Okay, so I was already married at that point.
Okay.
Because I got married in 93. So that church, this is just the coolest thing. But it was when I was in 7th or 8th or 9th grade
Okay.
when do you know what year it started, the church?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's 30 years old.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm 50 almost.
Yeah.
So, but isn't that cool
yeah, it's
that I
over.
was that you know, my friend Jenny's dad started
Yeah.
the church, and she
It's
told me that in
crazy,
junior
this
high.
connection. Yeah.
That story was terribly told at the beginning, but hopefully you'll get it.
No, we got it. We got it, girl. So
Okay.
I end up at this church, and immediately I just felt at home. I felt, as I started hearing people's stories, there was a lot of at-risk youth there, a lot of Hispanic girls. It was a lot of people at the time from like 3rd Ward, 4th Ward. And it just felt like
You joined the margin,
like
the
I was
outside-
here,
with
but there
other
were
people.
other people
Yeah.
there, because
Yeah.
before I had been just completely alone. And so I started to serve. I actually became a teacher for the 7th grade girls. I was showing up
Because you could speak
every time.
Spanish? Or
Well,
not
they
necessarily?
mostly spoke English, but I
Okay.
could speak Spanish, and I
Okay.
did speak Spanish. But I just, anytime there was an event, I was there.
Yeah.
And I found, and I think I mentioned to you the other day, that I started like healing. Like it wasn't just about me and my problems. Like there were other people who had similar problems, and we were in this together.
Yeah.
And I just started serving. And then the pastor of the church at the time took notice of me, asked me, I'll never forget, he and his wife just like cornered me one time and wanted my whole story. And I was still kind of leery of sharing the story, because a few times that I had done in my past, nothing had come out of it. But after months of serving there, I did. I shared my story with the pastor, and I told him how I was illegal and how I couldn't get a job and how I was struggling in my walk.
Yeah.
I had just been making some poor decisions, because when you feel hopeless, you know, you can't help sometimes but make poor decisions, because
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you make good decisions at
Yeah.
that point. And he listened, and he not only listened, he started to call, he made phone calls. He called lawyers. He reached out to a couple, our senators, trying to figure out if there was some sort of loophole. And he figured out, he got the same big fat no that I did. And he really, it really touched him. And I was touched that it touched him, you know, this man. And, you know, I kept volunteering there. And then one day, he and a few of the other church leaders asked if I had a moment. And I was like, uh-oh, what happened? But they pulled me into the office, and they said they wanted to hire me to work at the church. And they had figured out a way to try to do it legally. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it, because no one had ever done that for me. And it was the first time that someone had, from here,
Yeah. Had
that
stepped
walked
over.
into this space
Yeah.
and started to pull me into this. And it changed my life. As probably people have picked up, that man ended up becoming my father-in-law. His son graduated college that year and came to Houston to go to medical school, and we met, and I got
Wow.
my green card, y'all. But it was legit. It was
Yeah.
just a beautiful
Yeah.
story. And we were married 9 months later. And I just knew he came from such a strong, serving, godly family. And I came from such a broken family that God used this union to do good.
Yeah.
You know, we always knew that adoption would be part of our story. I always wanted to be the person who would be willing to reach out into the margins, in particular of children's lives, because I was that child
Yeah.
for so long. If you read in some verses in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, God's command to the Israelites when they were harvesting was to leave fruit behind, whether it was grain. If they were harvesting olives, he'd say, only beat the tree once. Leave the olives for the foreigner, for the widows, for the orphans. There's one verse in Leviticus 19, I believe it says, leave the fruit on the edge of the fields. And so that it would be easily accessible
Yeah.
for the marginalized. And it made me ask, are we living our lives in a way where we're easily accessible to these people who are in the margins, to these children who are in the margins? And boy, it sounds beautiful now. It's gotten us in a lot of trouble. I've gotten in over my head, for a while, because I wanted to help everyone, and definitely stretched beyond our means. But eventually it led us to Foster here in Conroe.
Yeah.
And through that experience, we realized, like, why aren't more people doing this? I mean, as a foster mom, you probably get told, like, I could never do it. Or we felt like we were put on this pedestal when we didn't feel like we felt ugly and hard. And it was just this terrible space in so many ways. And so we basically selfishly created an orphan care ministry in our churches just to try to have like-minded people and to inspire others to do what we were doing. And we did that. And then one day, a man came to speak at our church that his daughter had started a nonprofit in Haiti. She had started a boys' home in Haiti. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said, there are so many street boys in Haiti that they're looked on like cockroaches. And I remember just thinking, like, really? No one deserves to be looked on like that. And I just knew in my heart in that moment that we had to go. But at the time, we were fostering, I had babies, I couldn't go. So Dan went. Do you have any questions?
Not one question. You are a beautiful storyteller. This story, I've never heard it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there it is.
Thank you for sharing it.
So we ended up, Dan went to Haiti. Really, it was a medical mission trip because he is a doctor, and the person who took him to this boys' home was really envisioning that he would go in that capacity. But really, the day before he came back home, they said, do you want to meet the boys who just aged out? And he was like, sure. And so they took him over down this like narrow alleyway into this one room apartment. And there were all these boys with a candle in the middle of the table, feverishly making these macrame bracelets, because that's what they were doing to try to survive. And they see this, American, and they want to sell these bracelets to him. And of course, he bought every single bracelet that they were making. It was like a baggie. I still have it. And he bought all of those bracelets, and he came home, he was unpacking, he hands me the bag, and I look at these bracelets and I think, these young men are trying. They're trying to do something to better their lives. And I just knew at that moment that God was calling us to go deeper. And we started, at the time, it was called Hand Up Global Goods, because we wanted to give a hand up to these young men. We did some research and realized that up to 90% of orphans in Haiti are not true orphans. They're poverty orphans. They're given up to orphanages because parents just don't have a means to provide for them. And so I had this idea. I didn't mention that my dad, there's always good and the bad.
Sure.
So, my dad was abusive and honestly undiagnosed, I would say, bipolar narcissism there. But he was a very hard worker, and he was a man who was self-taught. And so he had a sewing manufactory, and we worked in it as kids. And I didn't realize, but you glean these things along the way. And so I decided that jewelry would be a vehicle towards job creation for these young men. So I showed up and I said, hey, I have some jobs for you. And that kind of grew into walking alongside them with discipleship. We provided for their basic needs for a couple years, but with the hopes that in a couple years they would age out of the transition program and be self-sufficient with jobs and Jesus. That's what we called it.
Right.
And we had some success, but really the deeper I got into the work in Haiti, the more I realized I didn't know. And I realized, like, holy crud, this is like long term. This isn't we're not gonna change Haiti in 2 weeks, and a lot of us, when we go on these short-term mission trips, we think we're gonna change something in 2 weeks, and that just doesn't happen. And so really that's evolved into what's called the Hug Collective. After 7 years of doing this, I realized that it's gonna take a lot of us, local community doing their small part to make a difference in Haiti. And so we have these 5 pillars, which I can post later.
Yeah.
But these 5 pillars are what we've discovered it's going to take for these young men to be able to see themselves, who they are in God, and to be providers, to be leaders, to be able to run a business, to be able to mentor. Like, these are all very important things. And so that's what we're working on. And it's not easy, but it is worth it. So that is the Hug Collective.
A hug piece right here.
Yeah, that's one of the
I don't think you have this one anymore.
No.
This is, what would we call this? This would be called a...
it's a retro
It's
piece.
a limited... It was limited. Everything's limited edition.
Yes. Yeah. We did that about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a beautiful, beautiful piece. It was called the Shawar.
Still is, I think.
But we do, I mean, my earrings are hug. My ring is hug. Really, job creation is a big part of what we do, because we realize, and we don't just hire the teens that age out of orphan care. We hire mamas and whoever's qualified and who's ever willing to work, because we realize that paycheck that they earn could be the difference whether they send their kids to an orphanage or not. Yeah. And so that is an important part of what we do, but it's not the heart of what we do. Right. The heart of what we do is mentoring, creating relationships, plugging into local churches. Haitians are a very collective society. It's about the group, and it's very important to be plugged into that social fabric. And that's something that we inadvertently don't do when we start orphanages in Haiti and things. We kind of pull those kids, we build walls, and they're disconnected from their communities. But they need those communities to survive. They need those communities to thrive. So when they're 18 and they age out and they find themselves there, they find that they have no connections. Yeah. And it makes it very hard. And without knowing, we actually had just perpetuated the problem rather than helped.
Yeah, you helped me see that. Several years back, I've talked several times on this podcast about visiting Haiti. Again, another synchronicity between us. That kind of started for me in Haiti and for my husband in Haiti. And but going in, I had not begun to dig as deeply into trauma and attachment and all these things. And but you go into the orphanages and the gates shut, and all the children just run to you as if they've known you for all your life, like you're a grandmother returning, every 3 months.
And it's sweet and wonderful. It feels so good and innocent.
And wonderful and so rewarding as the American coming over. Then as I began to dig into attachment and all of these things that I'm learning about trauma, I began to understand how that shows the lack of attachment, because securely attached children don't run to strangers and hug them.
No.
And so, that kind of piece began to fall together for me. And then also just spending some time on your back porch talking, and you're very passionate about how we really do help the orphan, and how we inadvertently do things that don't help the orphan. And so I think that's what you're saying here.
Absolutely. And it's not easy to talk about because it looks so innocent and beautiful, but that is about, and it's what you do here. It's about digging deeper. And when you dig deeper, you start to think, why is this child hugging on me? Is this child attached to anybody in this community?
Right.
Shouldn't there be a sense of stranger danger, especially knowing that Haiti is a hub for sex trafficking? Does every American that come to Haiti have good intentions? Well, no, not every American. I remember staying at a hotel and seeing an American man with a 14-year-old girl who was a prostitute, and that's very common. There are some orphanages there that rent the kids out to people coming with bad intentions. Yeah. And we don't know this. Right. We come in and we think, oh, this is so wonderful and sweet, but it really isn't. And so the questions that we asked is, where do these children come from? Is there any chance that they can stay connected to their family? Or if not their family, to community? I don't want to use the word foster care, but there's families that could possibly, if maybe we had done a little bit more research and investigated a little more. It's cheaper to raise a child within a family context in Haiti and many underdeveloped countries than it is to form an entire institution around it.
Isn't it the same though here? Let's just think about the foster care system for a little bit. Like if we could go in and provide some support, some education, some trauma treatment, some recovery programs for struggling families early on. If we could provide safety enough to where they aren't afraid to reach out for help, like could we not do the same? I mean, I'm just saying I'm pie in the sky here, like thinking about.
And I don't even think it is pie. I think, and I'm not even going to say it because I don't even know enough about it, but I think there are some organizations who are trying to put emphasis on that.
Sure.
But yeah, if I had to do it all over again, foster to adopt, that is, I would have gone in with a mentality of like, we're just here to foster, but not just a child, but to possibly minister to the families of those children. I think I would have had maybe a healthier approach to how I tackled it all. And you've probably talked about this here. I ended up ministering to the biological mom of my son because I realized she grew up in the foster care system like so many people do. And I wish I had known that. But at the time you go in, it's like, no, we're what's best for this child.
Yeah.
Of course we're what's best. And you don't even think about that maybe there's a possibility that there's something better for that child.
Isn't that crazy? It's the same picture, right?
Yeah.
It's the same picture. We think we're what's best. As Americans, we're going with, we think what's best. We think that we can rescue or save. And I'm certainly not saying that that doesn't need to happen, because there are children that are dying and suffering.
Course.
And we are both adoptive parents, so we both understand that. But there is an openness that happens in your mind as you go through this, where you start asking questions that lead you to different answers and different thought processes and different journeys. And
absolutely. And it takes people calling it out. So our partners, Grangu, they do have, it's a home for at-risk kids. Okay. I mean, their children are children that were living on the streets. And I mean, there are things she would love to do differently, but sometimes there's just not enough resources. Right. But I'll never forget, I wanted to start taking teams because I too thought that was the way to do it. Yeah. That was the way to bring in funds. That was the way to, the heart cannot grieve what it doesn't see. And so mission trips are a very good way to do that, to bring these things to our attention. Yeah. But I remember I wanted to bring teams, and she goes, well, we don't take teams to schools and then all of a sudden let them out into the playground and let the kids sit on their laps, play with their hair. There's always like a structure. There's a service provided. And so she helped me realize that when we brought teams over, we needed to be very clear about those boundaries and how to have structure. And it wasn't about coming and bonding with the kids. You can't bond with a kid in a week and then leave. That's not healthy. And so that's when I started to be like, we need to reform the way we do these trips. Yeah. And that's when I started to ask more questions and think, this isn't the healthiest way to do it. But of course, it feels good. We come in and it's just, we see one side of it. But we don't realize that when we leave, I got to see it. I saw the aftermath of one team leaving and the kids just falling apart and crying because they felt in their heart that they just played for 5 days with this smiling teenager. This smiling teenager goes back to his home, to his family, and this child stays, and the nannies had to deal with it, If anything, I think we should be going and ministering to the nannies and empowering and building them up so that they can better provide for the children that God has put in their midst.
Kind of like Mom as Well.
Yes! There needs to be a Haiti edition of like Nanny's Well.
Yeah, you know what? It does all start. It starts right here with me and Natul and I, right? Me and Natul and I. Recognizing our own stuff. Yeah. Recognizing how we can better love ourselves so that we can better, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I like that point that you said, the nanny's well, mom as well. But it's true. Like, these are the women who day in and day out are working with these children.
Yeah.
And I think they deserve a place of honor, and oftentimes they're
Yeah.
completely ignored
Yeah.
on these trips.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made me have to look at myself like, what have I done wrong, or how can I do better? Am I asking enough questions? Definitely made me realize like I didn't have all the answers. And that's a hard place, because I think people who dive into the margins and want to help the fatherless, we tend to be fixers.
Sure.
And, we want to find solutions. And sometimes we have to be okay that there aren't easy solutions, and just kind of walk through slowly and see what God is showing us about us, about the situation, about the people we're serving. And that takes time.
Yeah.
And that takes relationship and heartache.
Yeah.
And we don't like to go there.
Yeah. No, you're basically, and you and I have had lots of medical debates, and not debates, but conversations too. But it kind of reminded me when you said that, it's like, okay, well, we can take this antidepressant, which, and I am not opposed to antidepressants when needed, we can take this and it'll hopefully doesn't even always do that, but fix it real quick. Or we can take the time, effort, and energy to go down and see what's at the root of this, what's going on. Let's don't just medicate it. Let's just don't make those feelings go away temporarily. Let's look down and see what's under the underbelly.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing.
Ain't nobody got time for that,
Nobody got time for that. But again, it shows up again and again, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It just keeps showing up.
Yes.
So we can either, just deal with the kids. Like I told Kyle, I said, being a foster parent can kind of feel like, just the whole not being a foster parent, the foster care system can feel like, you've like this boat with you've got this boat with a bunch of holes in it, and you're just plugging holes, and as soon as you plug this hole, another one comes, and you never address the real issue, what's causing the holes, or you need to re-plaster it or whatever, I don't know.
Get a new boat.
You just kind of need a new boat. You're kind of plugging holes, and I think that's
it's easy to get there when you're in survival mode.
Right.
It's almost like you need a space and resources to finally go, okay, I need to regroup, but it's like you're not allowed that.
Right.
And I feel like that's the circumstances of Haiti. It's, there are some children's homes that are legit. They they really are there to help and bring hope to these children and protect them. But it's like they're in such survival mode, because here's the ironic thing. The ones who are truly doing the work and that are trying to do their best, and that they're trying to maintain the dignity of these children, they're the ones struggling the most, because they're not exploiting the kids, so they're not getting funding. And I mean, it's a broken system.
Yeah.
The ones who exploit the children the most are the ones sometimes who get the most funding.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible thing. So how do we fight against it?
Yeah.
And part of it, I was just discussing with my team this morning, is we need more storytellers to go into Haiti, kind of like journalists, to go and capture the stories and come and bring them here. And there needs to be more prayer around that. Rather than us, let's go paint a church, let's go build an orphanage, let's go feed people, It's not just materially poor things that need to be fixed. It's when you start saying spiritually poor, well, we're very spiritually poor in this country.
Right.
How can we learn from our Haitian brothers and sisters? So it's more of a walking alongside. Rather than just going to serve, which is why I started this new initiative of Know Better, Do Better.
Yeah. I
which
got to
you
be
were
your second
on
guest.
last week.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was fun.
It really is. It's just a humble approach of like-minded people saying this is the work we're doing. This is what I wish I would have known. This is what I'm learning, because it is all about the process.
Yeah.
So much about this work is about the process.
And I think it's a compassionate thought to think, know better and do better, because I as a younger mom, I just thought I was just supposed to know everything. And when I didn't, or when I made a mistake, I just beat the heck out of myself about it, and whereas recognizing now in hindsight, I can look back and say, you know what, that's what I knew then, that's what I did then, and now I know something different, and I can do different, and I can do better. and tomorrow I'll know something new and I'll do better tomorrow. And then, you know, really having to let go of regret and things like that, you know, because we did what we knew.
Yes.
In all things, in orphan care and in parenting and raising children who've come from hard places. And Natul, like, I like the margin, that example. I've heard of that, and I knew what you were saying when you said, you know, living outside the margins. Let's just talk for the last few minutes of this podcast about how we can recognize those that some people are in the margins and still feel that they're living outside the margins. For example, an adopted child who's in a loving home, right? Sometimes we can be inside the margins and feel like we're living outside the margins. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah. I mean, I have briefly. I don't know that I have an answer to that, except like I tell my kids sometimes, you just start with prayer, asking God to show you who are those people, who's hurting.
Yeah.
But in order to ask God, you have to make space to hear him.
Yeah. Slow down.
Be quiet. You know, I told my mom, like, I just flat out tell them, I just lay down in my closet literally and just sit still. I have to force myself to do that. For God to open our eyes and make us aware of the needs, because there are people walking in our midst who are very much in the margins, and we don't even have a clue. Or maybe we do, but we don't even know how to approach. You know,
how did you know, I was born and raised here. I am an American citizen by birth. I never had to experience what you did. I did not feel or look different. I felt different. This is where I'm kind of going. I did not look different. I went to a Christian school, just like your sister-in-law. That's where we were going to the same Christian school. Now, I went there because my mother worked in the Mother's Day Out so that we could go there. But that's kind of what I'm trying to say. I grew up in a home where my dad that was raising me wasn't my real dad. We didn't talk about that. It was a secret. So here I was inside those margins, but feeling very much outside the margins. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So my question for you is, once you came into the margins, got your green card, married the doctor or the man in medical school, right? The family that was all together, and you know, everyone in the community had them on a pedestal, looked up to this family. I know the family from when I was a little bitty girl. Did you feel like you were in the margins when that happened? Did you feel like you had come in, or did you still feel on the outside?
Oh, like I said, 20 years later, I can now talk about this. It took a long, long time. There's so much shame, and you know as much as I do, shame takes a long time to dismantle. It has a stronghold on us. So I recognized, I felt very honored, and I saw God's hand that I was part of this clan, this family. But the other side was the mental battles. That I belonged.
That I belonged.
I belong here. And we had some struggles early on in our marriage because I sometimes tried to sabotage it because I didn't feel like I belonged. And I felt that inferiority.
I think that children who have been abandoned, who have been neglected, who have been abused, who have been adopted, who have been put into foster care, they have, and my husband and I were talking about this on the porch on Sunday morning, there is a deep-seated root that says, I don't belong. And I think that's what living outside the margins
and that's the worst feeling in the world. Even as a 43-year-old woman, I find myself getting my feelings hurt sometimes over silly things. Ultimately, it goes down to that feeling of not belonging.
And we work super hard to belong. You know, we wear the right clothes, we do the right things, we start the right organizations or businesses or whatever we do. We try to get in the right communities just to feel like we belong inside those red lines. But really it starts in here.
Yeah.
Because somebody even living on the outside could potentially feel as though they belong.
Yeah.
So I think that's
and I think where like words of affirmation, like sincere ones, come into play. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but like I know with your girls, I'm sure you're the same way. But I do give extra words of affirmation to Dayton, to our son.
Yeah.
Like you belong here. You are. It's so funny because I don't even realize that I do it, but I will say like, who loves you? Who loves you the most in this world?
Yeah.
And yesterday we were watching a movie and he came and cuddled up and he goes, who loves you?
He's like, I do.
Yes.
I think that's something that I know for me, I know for Kyle, that's what we were talking about because he was adopted. And in a sense, I was adopted. Is there is a thing inside us that will always need to be affirmed. And we can look to other people to do it, or we can learn to give it to ourselves, accept it from God. But that we do belong.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately what you're saying is you're saying, do I belong? And then answering the question and then inviting other people to come in.
Yes, inviting other people. Build there's a phrase out there, and I'm not saying it exactly, but like build longer tables, not taller fences.
Oh, I've heard you say that. Yeah.
And it's become an important part of our household. Yes, I had a lot of deficits coming into our marriage and into this family, but I brought a lot of good things too. And like my husband says, I've like rocked his world, like opened up his eyes, and it's been so mutual. It's been a beautiful, beautiful thing. But part of that is inclusivity. We look for the people who may not get invited to dinner. And again, you've hung out with us. We're not perfect or great in any stretch of the imagination.
You're pretty fun.
But having that, always kind of keeping an eye for those people, because we know what it feels like to not belong, and we're going to do our part to make others not feel that, and we mess up, I'm sure, and just conversations like this, giving people permission to talk about that feeling, and how we
recognizing
can
it, because you see something in someone else that you're familiar with, right? Like if you are in touch with your feelings of not belonging, then you're going to see that in somebody else. Whereas if you're not, you might not recognize it. You might see it as them showing off to try to fit in. You might see it as them being overachievers to try to fit in.
Yeah.
But if you're in touch with that, knowing that feeling of not belonging, then you're going to recognize that in somebody else. And so again, I think it starts with recognizing that in yourself so that you can better, not change or shift, but be with somebody.
Yeah. And just have that awareness.
Yeah.
And again, I'm really a firm believer in just praying constantly about it, and God really will show you those people. He'll give you a feeling. I think we've all had that feeling where we've wanted to talk to someone, and sometimes we don't because we're afraid. I think if more of us I think we would be better if we really just took that risk. Even if we fall on our faces and get rejected. I tell my kids, when you're sharing the gospel, you're going to get a lot of no's and a lot of, but that one yes makes it so worth it.
One connection. That's right.
Yeah. Just the other day, and we're probably coming here to an end. We went to volunteer at a community garden through National Charity League, my daughter and I, and there was a woman, a Hispanic lady there that I could tell was employed. We were all volunteers, but I made it a point for my daughter and I to go and pull weeds next to her. And I did what my mom did. My mom was a woman who really ministered to other women in hard places. And I used to call her Barbara Walters, because I'm like, Mom, you ask so many questions. You're like that too.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
I always liked your mom.
Yeah. You asked so many questions, but it wasn't she was being nosy. She really just wanted to unpack women's hearts. And she could feel, she sensed those women who needed that. And so I just started asking questions, and we were doing and pulling, and she ended up sharing her story with me, and I got her number, and just an opportunity to minister to this Honduran woman who's not legal, has had a hard life.
Wow.
And
you recognized it.
yeah, and I'm not gonna I'm gonna change her life and just a relationship and saying, affirming her.
And even that I'm sure you spoke her language.
Yes,
right?
yes, and that's a big
comforting.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's a big thing that I'm able to speak Spanish. But I say this story is we've all felt that, and we need to trust our intuition a little more. We don't have to travel to Haiti or to Africa to reach out to the marginalized. They're in our backyard. They may be our neighbor. And so I think if we're all praying about that and saying, God, show me, tell me what to say. And it may take you getting out of your comfort zone and getting a little messy in the margins, then do it.
Yeah.
I heard someone say the other day that, I'm taking this from a friend, Kristen. She said, you don't ever want to hire a mechanic with clean hands. You want someone who has their hands dirty, who can get in there. Yeah. Well, she said, Jesus, as a gardener of our hearts, has dirty hands. He's not afraid to get in there and go deep and dig. And we need to take that example.
It's good. That's good, Natul. Can you say that in Spanish?
Está muy bueno.
That's good enough. I love it when you start speaking this beautiful language. And I like you to speak that in front of my girls, because they don't get that in my house, and they need it. They need to hear that. They could totally fit into your home.
Yes,
they look like you and your daughter, your daughters. Thank you. Is there any? Okay, tell us how we can get in touch with you. Give that information.
Yes. So our organization is thehugcollective.org. Okay. You can find us on Instagram. We're really social on Instagram, but you can go to our website, thehugcollective.org. Okay. And on Thursdays, we've started our Know Better, Do Better. It's just an Instagram Live. And so if you want to hear more conversations, kind of like what we're having in terms of when it comes to just orphan care in general, that'd be a good place for you to visit. So I'm so grateful to be here. I think the last thing I'd love to say is that it doesn't take one person to change the world. It takes all of us doing our small part.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. And thank you. Thank you for doing your small part, because if you're listening to this, most likely you are in the margins, and you are doing your work there, and you're walking alongside others, particularly children, vulnerable children who need you. And it's hard work, and we are not superhumans, and we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to muster compassion and understanding, not just for them, but for ourselves, so that we can go and do that. We got to keep doing it. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So hang in there. Don't forget to go to the website, momaswell.com, and subscribe. When you subscribe each week, you get an email from me. A newsletter of sorts. I'll send out the latest podcast and just kind of an update on what's going on in my family, what I thought, a blog that goes with each podcast. I hope you'll subscribe. You'll also be the first to know about new things that are coming up, which in the fall, I'm going to start some book studies, and there'll be just 10 or so people in each study, and we're going to get to know each other on a deeper level, and just kind of let some experts and some books guide us through, and to give us some tools to do this hard work. So anyway, I'll see you next week. And again, thanks for listening.
Mama's way.